All right. Well, we are very excited to be here today for the long-awaited discussion on complementary currencies, MycoFi, and credit pooling with three friends of BioFi, Scott Morris, Will Ruddick, and John Clippinger. And I think John will be joining us shortly. But Tyler, do you want to welcome us here into this space and set some context for us?
I do. I do. Hello, everyone. My name's Tyler, and I have the pleasure of stewarding this lovely BioFi community of practice. And so, if this is your first time at one of these events, we wholeheartedly welcome you. We're super excited you're here. And we want to let you know that these calls are just one tiny portion of what we get up to as a community of practice. Um, I'm going to paste in the chat there what our purpose is as a community, which is to cultivate and support a community of practitioners who are designing, capitalizing, implementing, and evolving bioregional financing facilities through peer-to-peer learning and coordination. And so part of our offering are these calls where we get to do some knowledge sharing, get to do some relationship building and networking. But we also have an entire platform on Hilo that just this week actually crossed 400 members. And so there's a lot of folks from all around the world who are having these sorts of discussions, sharing about events, sharing about the work that they're doing, the organizations that they're working on and forming, and asking for the help they need, asking for ideas, asking for resources, and sharing their services and sharing their offerings. And so it's quite a lively place. And we'll share more details at the end of the call as to how to get involved. But really hope to see you there as well. And I'm always available if you have questions for how to engage with this community. So feel free to chat me here during the call, and I'll leave my email as well. But we are super excited to welcome you. And I always just want to stress and emphasize that we only do this through the leadership of you all. As stewards, we can create invitations, we can create the space, but it's really up to us as an emergent field in this transformative time in the world to lean into our creative edges, to lean in to the risks we want to take and ask for the help we need to do that together. So we're just trying to create the conditions for that to work well with all of us.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone had some rich conversations and is feeling the potential that moving out of the box of fiat currency opens for us. And now I'm just going to do a little bit of context setting before I hand it over to my friend John Clippinger to share with us what he's been up to. And I'm going to read from section 4.5 of the BioFi book here. And the title of this section is Shifting Theories of Value and Ownership. And this is really core to the discussion today. What do we value? How do we create currencies and credit pooling and value flows that are aligned with our values? And how do we identify those values? What are the processes with which we can surface our values in a place-based way rather than a global way that leads to a monoculture value system or monetary system? So in the book, we say that bioregional financing facilities, or BFFs, can serve the realization of a bioregional regeneration strategy, and that their task is to determine how financial resources can best be deployed to support the transition to regenerative economies. And this purpose embedded in the BFF structure enables them to support a shift in the theory of value in a bioregion. Over time, BFFs can also enable a shift in value for the external actors that the bioregion engages with. They can look at who defines value, who creates value, and who reaps the rewards of that value. They can enable value identified through participatory processes, including participatory budgeting, to translate into the bioregional economy, its neighboring economies, and even the global economy. Additionally, BFFs can support the transition to a more local economy, enabling a greater percentage of the value created by the people there to stay there. BFFs, we hope, can support the repair of relationships between humans and the rest of life in a way that recognizes the intrinsic value of the more than human world. Enabling the legibility of this value is something that other financial instruments and institutions have largely failed to do thus far. The monoculturalization of value has been reinforced by abstract, decontextualized economic metrics, including GDP, that take a uniform approach to assessing value. This collapses dimensionality, as such measures fail to account for real value creation or ecological well-being and do not account for much needed circulation in our value flows. So today we're going to hear from three real innovators and amazing thinkers and creators in the field who are working on currencies and credit risk pooling and something called MycoFi that we're going to learn all about that try to address this shift in a theory of value and are trying to surface value in a place-based way. So the first of our speakers today is my friend John Clippinger. John is one of the co-founders of a new organization that he's going to tell us about called First Principles First. He is one of the founding advisors of the Active Inference Lab, and Active Inference plays a big role in the work that John is doing, and I'm excited for him to tell us more about that. And he is a research scientist at the MIT Media Lab. John, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to be here. And I was very just what you read is so on the mark of what we need to do. And let me give you a little more context on my background because of how I look at things. So I also did my PhD in AI and many years ago in doing dynamic modeling and linguistics. And I started a number of companies around that. And I also started a company more recently called ClearTrace on trying to sort of create financial incentives, but also be able to verify the production of sustainable energy. But all along, I've been really interested in how to create a new economic system. I think if we're going to address the problem of climate change, it's going to have to be you're going to have to change the incentive system at scale and flip the economy, and have the economy value the creation of life rather than the extraction of life. And right now we have an economic system that is really designed. It came out of Industrial Revolution. Enlightenment is based upon principles of physics, of sort of classical mechanics. It's not based on the principle of keeping living things alive. It's about how do you extract value from it. It therefore creates negative externalities. And Samantha, is what you're saying is that when you have a pricing system, you know the price of everything, but the value of nothing. And basically what you're doing is you're collapsing complexity into a single dimension. And then you're clearing a market around that. And then that aggregates to a particular group of people who are willing to decontextualize everything in order to concentrate wealth within a small party. And I think and I have a number of slides. I talk about the evolution of money and the economy based on this. So I could share that with people afterwards. But what we're doing at the Active Inference Institute and this whole notion of active inference, there's no way I can explain active inference in 10 minutes. It's a heavy lift, I mean, by any count. And then you put that in new currency design, and then your head spins. But basically, it's also the concept of active inference is how do things have agency? How do they stay alive? And it's also based upon a notion of the predictive brain, so the Bayesian, what they call the Bayesian brain, the things stay alive by making predictions about themselves and about the world around them, and then they try to build up more complex models. But what if the free energy principle comes in, and basically it says, as a fundamental principle of physics, is that it is like, well, value is created when you reduce uncertainty about something. You de-risk something. So you make a prediction about something, you take an action, and do I know that thing better? Have I changed that thing? And the free energy principle is a very interesting concept because it's scale free, it's domain free, and so you can both highly contextualize it, but you can also scale it up. and you scale it up in a different way. And this is what living systems do. There's living systems are nested systems, and they're basically structured hierarchically and functionally so that the top affects the bottom. It's like they all interact to keep each other alive. I mean, in the metaphor of the human body, say you don't have the heart trying to do a takeover of the brain or the mind, a lung. They recognize to keep the whole thing together, you have to maintain these relationships. And so that's what homeostasis is about. And so when you start to model, and what we are doing is developing a platform to create something called what I call sort of biofirms. And basically a biofirm is something that gives agency to a particular locality in order to keep it alive and tries to understand, represent the underlying economics of that. In other words, what kind of energy do I have to acquire, expire in order to create this living thing, which could be a combination. It could be a bioregion, a ecosystem itself, and it could be the people who live in that. How do they interact together in such a way that they can create sufficient value that they can keep their independence and agency? So, but it's a very rigorous method also. So it's not just engineering. It's really predicated on fundamentals in neuroscience, physics, and biology. So you're learning from nature how it's biomimetic in that sense, and so you're incorporating that into your incentive system. So there's like two key algorithms that work in this new currency, and one of them is the free energy principle, and basically says to what extent is value created by creating a new thing that creates reduces uncertainty, makes something more likely to happen. And that's the goal. I have to say that all these things are agentic. They're trying to keep like life itself. They're trying to evidence themselves, trying to take some kind of expression of themselves to stay alive in the context in which they're in. So you have a metric for doing that, for allocating value, new value, which is not inflationary. That's a key concept. And it's independent, so it's not capturable. And then there's something called the Shapley value, which done by a man named Shapley, who got a Nobel Prize, is on cooperative economics. And it's basically saying what contribution did some group, an entity do to the marginal outcome. And so therefore you distribute value based upon your contribution to marginal outcome, your marginal contribution. So the two of these basically work in concert to then say, okay, we objectively being able to reduce our uncertainty about something and then give agency to it. And this is where participation comes in, is saying, okay, well, who contributes to that? What kind of observations do what kind of data do they provide? What kind of new ideas do they provide? And what kind of actions do they take? And that can be valued, and then the issuance of a token around it. So it's very different than your classic sort of information arbitrage. It's almost the opposite of that in terms of what you have in market mechanism, clearing a market. You're actually preserving the uniqueness of the different. You're valuing a system to represent the complexity of the context in which it's in, and it's highly localized. But the other part of this is that you can know a localized system can be embedded in a more complex system. So you're not it's not within your classic sort of industrial structure. Um, but that's sort of a quick flyby on that.
Yeah, yeah. So we have about 4 minutes left for you. I'm wondering if in the last few minutes you could tell us how, if there was a bioregional organizing team that wanted to apply this
Right.
approach to designing their own currency, how they would do
Yeah.
that, what that would look like.
Yeah. So actually, I'm talking about four or five groups across. And I have a friend who started. I don't know if you know Jonathan, the guy. He did something called Tenahu in Africa. My friend is doing some in Brazil. What we're doing is taking a platform and allowing someone to say, okay, you can write, you can decide what the currency is, represent your region, and then it'll go out and generate a model from it. It'll automate that process, and then you can iterate that. And I won't go into details. It works with LLMs and active agent models, but it gives you a basically a digital twin of your particular geo region and how well you represent it. And then you're able to run that and keep iterating. You're generating agents. They're nested agents that work together to automate a lot of those processes. And that would generate a currency for that particular region that would be represent the extent to which you're able to achieve the outcomes for your region. I can go, I'm doing this for my own farm. And I have been able to put the data into the farm. And my interest is, for example, in how do I rewild my farm? And what kinds of actions most contribute to that in terms of interventions of soil and the various things that can be done. But you can create a currency for that locality that incentivize these people. I mean, that's a very quick walkthrough. But I have a larger slide deck. And so we're generating these tokens, and then we do the simulations of them. We do simulations of the different outcomes to see what is the most desirable one to take. But it is algorithmic, so it works on this Shapley value principle.
And so you could connect it to kind of a digital twin of an ecosystem and the health of the
Right.
ecosystem form the value of the
You
currency.
represent the health of the businesses and how do I increase that health? What things increase that health the most? And then those things that increase the health, you issue a token around that. And you can create liquidity among different kinds of networks of these efforts itself, so they can actually complement this. So we're doing work on agentic mesh networks to allow that kind of sort of a liquidity across different networks. And then there's how do you create the interface with a fiat currency that doesn't jeopardize the integrity, the complexity of each of the localities.
Mhm.
And that's another question. But
That's tricky. That's the tricky stuff.
again, there's a principle, there's a concept called law of requisite variety. And that is how do you maintain the homeostasis of the whole network vis-a-vis its interface with the fiat currency and not have that be subordinated to the fiat currency. So I'll just leave that up.
hmm One last question for you before we move to Will. Um, how do you see this intersecting with the rights of nature and the potential to give rivers or salmon
Well,
population, buffalo
Well,
population?
well, I believe this is a way of implementing the rights of nature.
Right, right.
This is saying it is saying giving nature agency and say,
Economic.
okay, and here, what is the right of nature? I mean, this is so, and we're looking at the whole in a legal context too. Is that okay? You have certain rights, but those rights don't mean anything unless you can implement them and you give them value. And so it is, it's say, okay, this thing, this is what my friend is doing in Africa. I mean, they're looking at working with the Rwanda government on this and actually having a new currency on predicated on these principles. But yes, it's about how to, those would be the define, that would be defined sort of the purpose of that particular biofirm. Just put it that way. It is designed to implement the rights of nature or a group that is supporting nature in that context. That
Mhm.
is what this thing is designed to optimize.
hmm Fantastic. Thank you, John. Folks are asking for any links you can share in the chat
Sure,
to your
sure.
slide deck, also
There's a deck I can share on this too, on the evolution of money. I think that helps explain it,
excellent.
because it's not something you can do in 5 minutes.
No, no. And John's been at this for a long time.
Long, long, long,
Yeah,
long time.
early to the
Long time.
DeFi space. We'll get into broader Q&A. We'll get some other voices in this space after our other two presenters. But I'm going to hand it over to Will Ruddick, who we're very excited to have here today. Thank you for dialing in, Will. Will is the founder of the Grassroots Economics Foundation. He identifies as a grassroots economist. I love that. And he combines traditional practices and economic innovation in his work in Kenya, where he's based and has been based for, I think, nearly a decade now. And some of the questions we're asking Will to address in his remarks to us today are what role can credit risk pooling play in supporting the transition to bioregional regenerative economies? What frameworks, tools, and approaches has grassroots economics been developing that bioregional organizing teams can apply in their work? Thank you, Will. Over to you.
Hi, thanks, guys. And nice to see a lot of familiar faces. So yeah, for the last, I guess, I've been in Kenya almost 17 years now, but for the last few years, I've been getting more and more focused on bioregional resource pooling and looking at how different tribes across Kenya. There's a main tribe I live with called the Giriyama, but there's many tribes around the area that all have very similar practices around resource pooling. Um, and at the same time, I've been getting more and more into the ecology side of things and looking at how resource pooling happens in mycorrhizal systems. And I think Scott will talk more about that kind of stuff too. But the main practice that I've been pushing or being exposed to where I live in the village I live in is that one family can basically call on the resources of almost the entire community, especially like their, 7 to 8 neighbors, maybe, 30 people to come and provide labor, provide resources, and there's a commitment to reciprocate over long periods. It's very, you can think of it as patient capital systems and really just trying to understand how those types of resource pools function. What are the sort of the basic protocols within them? We work across 5 different bioregions with over 100 groups. We work with refugee areas in Turkana and Somalia, water-rich areas like around Lake Victoria, and then a lot of savanna and coastal like mangrove forests. And the ability for groups to come together and support each other in doing regenerative agriculture, mostly reduced centropic agroforestry, that's been the real key is like, how do you fund that? How do you fund that sustainably? And in working with these types of models where you identify a resource pool, and the way that works is a lot of asset mapping. So essentially, there is clear commitments made by members of these communities for labor, for different types of resources. Those are placed into a pool that's really an intangible commons, is kind of what Ostrom would call it. Think of it as like an endowment or something like an escrow account that the community has witnesses to, and the elders are involved in kind of keeping that knowledge clear. And once that pool is full, that's your seed of this kind of commons of assets. And that can also include a national currency. Um, then people have an opportunity to pull from that pool within guidelines for that community, right? So for instance, they can say, I need to pull from that pool to do a water catchment program. So they're going to pull money from that pool for doing very particular stuff, let's say like buying stones that are not available in that community. But as much as possible, they're pulling from commitments from other people who have put resources or their commitments for resources into that community. So if there is someone providing stones or labor or sticks to do weaving, to do terracing and keyline systems, they're pulling from that. We also do a lot of certification as well. Certificates as well can be in those pools. So if you can think about the schema or the language here is that essentially you're making claims against future assets or claims against existing or past assets, right? So like a certificate or an attestation. Some of the things that Bill was mentioning sound more like attestations or certificates than currencies. We actually don't use the word currency for years and years. Actually, we've never used the word currency in Kenya, and we're fairly against community currency in general. We found it to be disruptive in the wrong direction and really actually bringing in negative monetary aspects into community resource sharing that don't need to be there at all. And there's a huge, beautiful, rich history of resource coordination practices that don't involve money or any form of fungible bearer unit like a currency at all. And so the idea here is about the space. You're creating a space that connects assets together in a fair way, and a community to come up with the valuation system on those assets. We use national currency a lot, but it's not a must. In terms of the relative value of those assets, we talk about limitations, how much credit do people have within those commons, and then how do they actually circulate and exchange that. And we've built a platform for that. It's called Sarafu.network. We've got over 250, I think, communities around the world using it. A lot of them are in Kenya, but more and more outside. And we've got a few folks here like Antonio from Refi Sicilia, who are basically making commitments for things like olive oil. and being able to exchange commitments for olive oil for things like um, um, consulting hours, right? And being able to do that really, really well. And so you can the website's free. It's all open source. You can copy it. Our goal is really that organizations around the world understand how to do resource pooling, how our ancestors did it, and appreciate folks like Zachary who are pushing the idea. Mueria is a video that we just had out recently. That's a name on the coast where I live. And once you kind of tap into those words, like what was the actual call for help that invoked this type of reciprocity, you're really plugging into a beautiful, beautiful network that seems like how humans really evolved. We didn't evolve through barter. We evolved through common pooled resources. And I think that that's the type of economics we've really been missing, and that's how we build trust and abundance. And I think formalizing that in all kinds of we work with Islamic finance groups now who do the exact same types of ancient indigenous systems, but they call it an Islamic endowment or a WAFQ, WAQF. Very similar types of systems, and they're in every religion, every culture across the planet has some form of common pool resource pooling, and those can be integrated quite easily with blockchain. So we've done a lot of that work because it makes it such that you can cross between my work and Zachary's work with zero in. We don't have to go through the BlackRock to get to each other. We don't have to go through the US dollar necessarily to get to each other. So we can cross boundaries quite easily, and we can create pools that identify what we find valuable. And then basically it's the network of those pools that creates this big mycorrhizal-like system. So yeah, happy to be here and happy to chat more with you guys. Over.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Will. I know you've done quite a lot of writing on this. So any links you want to drop in the chat where folks can learn more, and the platform that you mentioned, is it available for any bioregional organizing team that wants to use it to do so?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, that's sarafu.network. I'll put it in the chat here. It's still on you need to have a crypto wallet to use it, but we have a thing called paper wallet, so you can do that. But by the end of the year, you can just have a regular username and password. Thanks, Scott. And
Amazing.
I'll pop my Substack on there. Uh,
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so now I see that Iris has a question, but Iris, we're going to hold all the questions till the end, if that's okay. Um, Next, we're going to hear from Scott Morris. Scott is the token Jedi and creator of MycoFi, and has his hand in many different currency and credit risk pooling and MycoFi pies, as it were. He got started with community currencies back in 2009, so he's been on this journey for a while. And he worked on Bancor in 2017. And today we're going to hear from Scott about first, what is MycoFi? Scott and his colleagues published an incredible book on this that came out shortly before the BioFi book. And he was also a contributor to the BioFi book. And what role can MycoFi play in supporting the transition to bioregional and regenerative economies? What frameworks, tools, and approaches are you and your colleagues working on that bioregional organizing teams should know about? And anything else you want to share with us? Over to you, Scott.
Sure. Thanks, Samantha. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many of you in one place. Normally, I have to go to a bunch of different calls to see all of my friends. But I know at least like half the people on the call, so I'm just going to be very casual with everybody. So MycoFi emerged as a meme at the Ko-Fi gathering. This was in 2023 out at the Commons Hub in Austria. Those who know me know that I'm a very big fan of this place, and I strongly encourage all of you to do your retreats and your hackathons at the Commons Hub. It's a very lovely place. You won't regret it. And so we were at this collaborative finance event coming up with sessions for the, participant-led portion of the agenda. And I'm there with Jeff Emmett, who is like Mr. Mushroom. Our man loves mushrooms. Not that I don't, okay, but he definitely loves them more. And so I was like, hey, what about MycoFi as this kind of jam between the mushroom realms and our, day jobs, if you will, of financial systems engineering. And it just kind of clicked and it really worked. And, the more that we have thought about it, which is a lot, the more it seemed like a very useful meme, primarily as like a gateway meme, if you will. And what I mean by that is that it is accessible first and foremost, right? It's meeting people where they are. We all love mushrooms. And it piques curiosity around like, what do you mean here? Clearly, seeing as that was the question that was just posed to me. MycoFi is really just a way of kind of opening up space for all of these different kinds of mechanisms. And when I was posed this in the context of our research project that is coming to the close at the end of the year here, I just said, look, I want any kind of system that is able to be organized by a local community on the basis of its own resources, right? Without having external dependencies, right? In other words, these are the kinds of systems and mechanisms that we rely on in times of financial and economic crisis. So we have been curating a list of the different kinds of organizations, sense-making frameworks, mechanisms and instruments, and case examples. And here in the last little bit of the year, I'm going to write up some kind of a playbook that is intended to be accessible and provide some kind of context for that curated library as like a reference library. This is going to get shipped over to Benjamin Life and the Open Civics Network, where you've got a group of gigabrains over there who put together a really cool knowledge commons that's coming to bear. I don't have a whole lot of time, but I do want to share just a little bit. We went to DevCon here in Bangkok, and this is Jeff up on stage giving this talk. I'm not going to give the same talk here, but just wanted to show that this is like an actual thing that we're out there talking about. And basically, we put forward MycoFi as a blend of decentralized finance, regenerative finance, and collaborative finance, right? So it's kind of there in the middle. And in the book, we basically put forward these design principles, right, that we can draw inspiration from as we are engineering the resource allocation and coordination networks of the future, right? Doing as the mushrooms do. These are kinds of the design principles you'll find in mycorrhizal networks and so forth. We also have the mycopunk principles, right? Mycopunks are the human elements of this, and what are the kinds of values that we're trying to embody in this. You can see that we got a link to the Git book down there. There's also a Discord if you want to come hang out with us there. But critically, right, what I'm finding MycoFi does well is does level setting on the complexity scale around how these kinds of mechanisms and systems that we're engineering. Like I'm hanging out with a lot of Web3 people and people who are actually kind of doing the technical side of this, right? But that this is not about having one chain to rule them all or one coin to rule them all, but that this is about, operating in a more collaborative, um, modular and composable sort of way. And so this leads us to more of a living systems approach where you're focused on what are the kind of core needs and requirements of the system and what is this thing intended to do. Now, the other thing, let me see, you cannot see my screen on this one. I'm going to share one more little thing. So I'm giving a talk these days that I'm calling emergency finance. And this is really where this gets even more practically oriented, right? And I'm starting halfway through here, but pulling the mushroom away for a little bit and we're just talking about what are these kinds of mechanisms that we're interested in, these are the kinds of systems that I would construe as MycoFi compatible, right? And so you're going to see a lot of familiar things. You're going to see some unfamiliar things in there. I've been on this big kick around emergency script. I happen to have the book in question here with me. It's a few $100 on Amazon or whatever, but just seemed like a really handy text to have uh, these days. And it includes a number of different types of script that were issued back in the Great Depression. And it's really just fascinating to see how many different ways communities reinvented money by necessity. And, I have a deep appreciation for Will's aversion to, putting the focus on currency because of how distracted we tend to get by like the noun, right? The thing. When this is really about social relations and rekindling and fostering trust in community, right? I am also a big fan of saying relational wealth is real wealth, right? Everything else is just a substitute. So, with that said, though, sometimes you do find yourself in emergency conditions and you need to have, more capabilities, right? More ways to pay for things because there's more things that we need to do than we have money to pay for, right? So I'm just very encouraged that a lot of people are taking to this meme and enjoying it and seeing it as the kind of playful thing that it is at first, but then there is a very serious sort of takeaway to this, which is that we need to be hanging up kind of these, well, creating these infrastructures, right? Like safety nets. And just like safety nets, you want to hang them before you're falling out of the sky, right? And in a time that is, as uncertain as these days are, and, just everything that's been going on this year, COVID and everything, it's very important to have these kinds of systems handy to help you manage some of that uncertainty and the volatility that comes with
Thank you, Scott. Are those slide decks things that you'd be able to share in the chat as well?
it. Sure, yes, at some point. I
Okay,
will.
and
How
we
about
can
we
follow up
promise
with
to get that out
you.
on the high low? Great.
Sure, we can follow up with you after. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
In the meantime, I will put our new MycoFi.earth. I did it right? Great, good. It's a little late, guys. Sorry for the like laggy brain over here. But we just got MycoFi.earth, and that is going to be our like signpost to all the MycoFi things. Um, Glad to
Beautiful.
be here. Thanks, gang.
Thank you,
Yay.
Scott. Thanks for
Beautiful.
staying up late. Yeah. So now we get to open it up. I know there's been a lot of juicy conversation flowing already in the chat. If you already put a question in the chat and it's still feeling alive for you, feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to sit with yourself for a second, really think about what might be a question that holds the conversation well between these three incredible speakers. But first, I want to turn it to you, Samantha, to see if you have anything that you're sitting with.
Yeah, I'm just feeling excited and inspired, and I think my question, and I don't really think we need to answer this right now, but maybe it's more a question we can all hold in this discussion is how do we weave these amazing efforts together and how do we land them in place and in places that are really thinking bioregionally about regenerating entire landscapes, watersheds, and bioregions with a biocultural lens. And, where our presenters already doing work in particular bioregions that could benefit also from some of the work that the BioFi project is doing, or Open Civics, or some of our other collaborators, and where we working where there's potential to apply some of these approaches to seeing value flows. So yeah, let's just hold that in the discussion. But yeah, over to you, Tyler, to facilitate the Q&A here.
Cool. So I'm going to turn it to you, Kevin. And just a heads up, if I feel like the conversation is getting kind of rabbit holed, I'll probably try to wrangle it back to make it as supportive for all the guests here. But I'm excited to see where this goes. Excited to hear your question, Kevin.
Yeah, to John Clippinger on digital twin, I was with some folks working on a digital twin in a town in a city in New Mexico, and they, figured out transit routes and all that stuff, and they didn't want to look at the historic injustice of redlining, which still leads to poor neighborhoods subsidizing rich neighborhoods on property tax and things. And because they were forward-thinking, progressive tech folks who wanted to build something new and didn't want to include, the current baggage of unjust history. And I just wonder, maybe that was just that group, and they just weren't real welcome because it just didn't move as fast as they wanted to move. And just wondered about digital twins and how digital twins does with. I'm from Mississippi, right? And so the past is not past. It's still with us, and our injustice is more present.
Well, it's a great question. I think the digital twin is no, it's a way of representing the current state of things. It's not necessarily where you want to go. And then if you, I mean, and I've looked at communities, and you have where you did develop a digital twin of a community, and you actually have, indeed, you have infrastructures that in themselves are discriminatory, and you actually are inhibitory. And the goal is actually to get outside those and understand how they suppress the capacity of a community or a bioregion to flourish. And so, but what you first need is a sense of where you are, and then it's where you want to go, and what are the things that allow you to take, and what are the things that are inhibiting from you from where you're going. So it's not saying, oh, we want to take an objective function of what something is. It's like, well, that is the current state. But how do we accurately understand that? But and when you're thinking about, say, representing a bioregion, it's like, and I said, for example, my own farm is that how accurately do I understand all the dynamics of my just the biology of my own area, and then if I'm going to intervene, what do I have to do, and how accurate is it, and how valuable is it? There's certain kind of interventions or others. And then when you put the social dynamic in, you actually need to represent those social dynamics as well as that interact with the constraints of the community. And on top of that, you have the financial constraints too.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, John. Carrie, over to you.
Thank you, Tyler. I'm trying to think about how to phrase my question usefully, as I have a lot. But I guess I'll name again something that I've named in these meetings before, which is that as somebody who's working on a lot of these issues, I feel very intimidated actually by the whole realm of digital currencies. And so this conversation was really helpful today. And I still feel very much like overwhelmed by the whole universe of how this is emerging. So that's a side note. But as I think about my own bioregion, and building capital flows here for the things that need to happen to build resilience and foster life, something I've been thinking a lot about is this question of ownership of resources and assets. And to Kevin's point, how do you contemplate in these designs, how do you contemplate reparations and redistribution at the outset in the context of planetary boundaries? So that's a thing that I'm really thinking about, which, planetary boundaries are borderless, but how do we start with what are the resources and assets we have in this place, and how do we ensure that through these new designs and through these new BFFs that we are ensuring equitable distribution of them? So I realize that's a huge question, and you can feel free to ignore it, but that's just what's on my mind.
Thanks, Carrie. Would anyone like to
Will,
take
you want to hop in?
a
Sure. Yeah, Carrie, I think that's one of the cruxes anyways, is as a community, how do you actually value a day's work on water catchment versus a bundle of sticks and mud for building a house? How do you do that? Right? And I think that you have to do that. And I think the way I see that happening is I see communities coming together, but I also see people hosting and holding their own space around that. So you yourself, if you're going to express the value of various offerings people are giving to you and say, look, I need X, Y, and Z. This is how much I'm going to reciprocate, that you can even define that yourself. And if John can also do it and Carla can also do it, the overlap of your curations of the things you value actually becomes that shared space. And so when we're looking at like, 5 villages across a clan, right? So one village has a system in which they are actively valuing labor and work, and that might change throughout the year because some things become more available than others, right? So that's a discussion. And the brain, so there's a heart process, which is resource flow. There's a brain process, which is actually like the tradition is called dome where I live, but these are the African fireside gatherings. This is where you discuss shit and you settle debts, you talk about planning. It's not something you're going to get around, and I really don't like the tokenization or tokenomics of trying to get around it. I think we actually need to do it and discuss it, and to come up with an algorithm to do it for us is really just totally the wrong direction. And so one community has done that. The next neighboring community has done it as well. And what's interesting about these neighboring communities is that they have an overlap in what they value. And that creates a bridge. And you have overlapping curations or overlapping value networks. And those span the entire bioregion, right? So you don't do something for the entire bioregion as one thing. You do it group by group. That group creates this network, like a mycorrhizal network, that creates that value system. So I really want people to think about what it is they value, what they offer, come together around that, and come into agreement around actual value exchange. And if that for now has to deal with US dollar value of things, that's totally fine. That's where we are right now. We're within a giant, BlackRock controlled, deep state, blah, blah, blah government system that we need to deal with at this moment and crawl out of it. And I see that as an opportunity in doing so. So stop there.
Nice. I want to tag on a quick little thing because I really resonated with your feeling of overwhelm, Carrie. Like that is a totally fair and valid feeling, and I imagine there's a lot more people here who are feeling that who may not be so ready to own up to it. I mean, true story. Like when I was growing up, I hated money and I hated politics, and I hated both of these things because anytime they came up, like people got upset. And, I didn't have any background context for that, but all I could tell was they're talking about this thing and now they're upset, right? So I just kind of wanted to avoid it until I really had to go deal with it. And then, surprise, now I'm a political economist. So I decided to specialize in both of those things. But it is one of those subjects that we are like conditioned to turn away from. And there is that quote, Will, you have to like come to my rescue here, but it's like that the fundamental concepts of money are like so simple that the mind is repelled, right? It really is just a thing we make up, and then we start moving it around based on something we care about. So, and just kind of just direct response to some of your prompts there, right? So recommendations that I make when people are beginning to organize around these things are it's like find one problem that you're going to be able to go do something about, right? that the community really cares about enough to engage with itself to go and deal with, right? And then you've got, your foot in the proverbial door, right? And you've got a vertical, right, where you have that foothold, and then you can start worrying about solving more problems. So before we start worrying about solving every problem, let's solve one problem, right? And then you've got a community that's engaged. You've got resources that are pooled. You've got, social and clearing cycles. People coming together and having these kinds of conversations, about resources and about what we care about, using them to accomplish. That's, that's the good stuff right there. And with that, you can do anything that, you really set your mind to.
Thanks, Scott and Will. John, any comments on that, or should I turn it over to Benjamin's question?
I'm sorry, was it me?
Yeah, just curious if you wanted to follow up on this question. If not, I'll turn it
Well,
over to
I mean,
Benjamin.
I think there's a lot there. I mean, and I agree with the concept. I mean, if you look at sort of pre-money and the whole idea of reciprocity and being able to have value exchange in a small group that people can recognize it, it's sort of the Dunbar problem. And the question is, as you expand groups and you expand across groups, then how are you able to represent the uniqueness of value by in context? And I think that that the aversion that people have to money, and I share it, is that it collapses dimensionality into a exchange. It's how do you make a market? How do you clear a market? You resolving a value or information asymmetry around a certain agreed to price, and this destroys the whole notion of reciprocity and value uniqueness. I do think there are ways of preserving that, and that's what I was getting at. So when I think about currencies, I don't think about traditional currencies. I don't think about infinite fungibility. This is the problem. It's like fungibility of what thing is unique is contextually set. And that represents the values and the intentions of a particular community context. But I think if you're really being realistic about how you're going to scale these things and how you move this on an international system and have something actually to reframe the international system that values nature as a living thing and not as an extracting, that has huge positive implications for the developing world, you're really going to have to do something that scales. And I disagree with the point that is you work within dollars in the current monetary system. I think I think that's a problem. So I mean, and these are nuanced questions. So I think they're really valid points to say yes, the reciprocity is a relational economy. It is contextual and people involved in it, and all that's great. But the question is, how do you preserve that and at different scales, at different velocities that we're going into? And I believe that the technology is coming here very, very strong with next agentic AI that's going to transform the stuff in finance totally. And one's got to be realistic about that and how to get these values encoded into that new kind of infrastructure. I think it can support the things that people are talking about, but this is a non-trivial engagement.
Thanks, John. Yeah, really appreciating the diversity of voices here in this conversation. This is fun. Benjamin, what do you got, friend?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This has been such a rich conversation, and I'm so heartened to feel such a degree of rigor and the capacities that are needed in order to make this transition happen and materialize it, and just so deeply appreciate the on the groundwork that particularly Will has been doing and Scott um, and just seeing that materialize is so heartening. And then to see the three of you in dialogue with each other has been just so nourishing and informative. I've been mostly focused on the grassroots scale of things because I feel like that's where real tangible change occurs, and very much aligned with the kinds of theory of change that have been outlined here in terms of aligning incentives through currency design and supporting democratic self-governance of the economy through worker-owned cooperatives. I love this idea of biofirms that you shared, John. But I was in this kind of bizarre and beautiful experience at the United Nations earlier this week, speaking with a UN ambassador from the Bahamas. And the kind of elephant in the room as he was talking about the tragedy of the commons and the way in which the United States uses its hegemonic power to bully smaller nations and enforce monetary policy on those nations. I was trying to push back against some of those kind of foregone conclusions, particularly in terms of how monetary policy can be reclaimed at the grassroots level through tools like blockchains that empower us to create these alternative models. But I found myself struggling to articulate how that would evolve into a new kind of macroeconomic order. It's a lot easier for me to imagine it at the bioregional scale in terms of how circular economies can be created and this transition can occur. But I was not really able to articulate how that would translate into a new kind of global macroeconomic order, if such a thing is even, possible to design from the top down, which I don't think it is. But I'm curious to hear from the speakers how we might move out of the Bretton Woods era, and what your kind of larger vision for a different kind of macro socioeconomic order might be based on these principles, and what would be your kind of near and long-term strategy for kind of sequentially moving us into that new paradigm.
You can speak to that. I mean, I was involved in a group with Open Earth Foundation and working in Costa Rica and with one of their central banks and thinking about how do they value their natural assets and keeping them alive, and how actually that contributes to keeping the planet alive. And right now, you have an economic system that doesn't value the natural assets and preserving their state. And since therefore they incur debt, there's debt asymmetries that are coming out of that. But if you were able to then value natural assets and the preservation and enhancement of natural assets, that would have an immense change in the exchange rates that are currently exist in the economy. Um, and I do think that when you start to move from an extractive to a homeostatic system, then the value, where value is being created is changed. It reverses the incentive system against a particularly extractive model. And not to get into too many details, but one of the things we're looking at is an area called catastrophic bonds. Basically, you cannot finance certain things because the climate change is becoming so extreme that it's becoming uninsurable. But if you can create incentives on the other side and say, well, how do you incentivize the reduction of the likelihood of those events or the cost of the events and reward and allow people to acquire capital into doing that, then you create a counter set of incentives and you create a learning system. Currently, the economic system does not learn. So it's not agentic in a sense. And so it's still sort of a classical mechanics of mechanical things. If you have something that is agency, it learns and is incentivized to do these things. And that's a different kind of system. The other point is when you look at these biological models, the difference between macro and micro is not two separate things. They're all resting that they're nested embedded systems. So what is true above is true below is one of the principles. So you have functional multi-scale functionality across them rather than being separate categories. The reason it's so structured and static is you have a static system. It's a very primitive system of accruing value. We have a richer way of doing that. Anyway, so that's a short cut way of explaining it.
Thanks, John.
Sure.
Scott or Will, would you like to respond to Benjamin? Or shall we go to Randall?
I missed some of the questions. Sorry, my internet died.
Yeah, you had some stuff going on over there. I saw that. I don't mind to hop in. And I'm just going to come at it from the angle of looking at it of, micro and macro. um, because it's very easy to see conceptually how okay, I do this with my hands a lot just to give us like a visual force field. Okay, there's like a little bubble that sits on top of the target economy. All right, it gets weirdly shaped when we actually have a map or whatever, but we've got our target region, and so we can kind of imagine that inside this region, right, it's kind of viable and feasible that we can go and engage the different stakeholders in that region around participating in not only one, but hypothetically many different economic systems and monetary systems in that, they have a range of ways to go from the things that they have and to get from what they have to what they want, right? Um, this would be very simple, if you have like a digital marketplace space, right? You would basically be able to have a network of digital marketplaces where the things that you offer are available for different prices and different currencies in these different spaces. You have a digital wallet that holds all of your currencies, and you're able to go and spend those with an increasing amount of ease, right? In kind of our idealistic scenario here. Obviously, we're still in the midst of learning how to do that. If you have any experience with kind of modern day crypto, where you have to choose like which network you're transacting on and which token you're using, and like what you're using to pay for gas and stuff, and is that all compatible with the person you're trying to send value to, right? In the future, this stuff will get automated, and be a lot simpler. So it'll look more like I have the tokens that I have from my situations and the kind of economies that I'm participating in, and then I'm trying to send Tyler some funds, but Tyler accepts a totally different set of currencies and tokens. Well, with the magic internet money, will be able to translate that value across my ecosystems and my forms of value, right, through these auto liquidity networks,
Right.
DEXs, and so forth, right, into the forms of value that Tyler is looking for, right, and that work for him. In fact, just met a wallet product while at DevCon, called Yodel, in case anybody wants to go check them out. I can't like fully endorse them because I haven't been using it yet, but they seem to put a pretty heavy emphasis on this aspect of the user experience. Like, look, man, like right now we're just putting way too much on the user. It creates way too large of a margin for error.
Yeah,
So we need to re-simplify this. Just you're
absolutely.
just trying to send $10 worth of value to your buddy, right? So, provide the user with the interface that helps them do that, right? And doesn't ask them a bunch of questions that will only confuse them or give them options that give them the opportunity to screw things up and lose money in the process, right? So, I think there is a big, kind of local to global translation function. But with decentralized finance and DEXs, I mean, this is what the Bancor protocol introduced and changed forever in terms of financial infrastructure on planet Earth, right? Like if you wanted to take a small scale token or currency and be able to convert it for other stuff before the Bancor protocol and before distributed exchanges, you would have to go to a centralized exchange, which is like the NASDAQ or something. And good luck, right? Just isn't
Right.
going to happen. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was an advisor, one of the first advisors to them with Bernard Lautier,
Yeah.
and the whole idea of atomic swaps is really great. However, however, in order for it to work, and you can see what's happened to them, you also have basically you're doing price arbitrage and people taking different positions, and just you're really arbitraging on the it's an information arbitrage system, and I think that's where it
Hmm.
fails. So.
Hmm.
And so, maybe I'm blind to this, but the whole free energy principle is a way of limiting information arbitrage because it's based in physics. And if you understand something at one scale, it works at all scales. So they can interact among different. That to me is like the magic of the whole thing. That's the magic of biology.
Hmm.
And so it's like a stem cell. Each thing it can recreate itself, create the whole thing. It's a holographic model And so that and you preserve those relationships across different domains. So this gets back
Mm,
to the whole question of right, and those relationships are like human relations, is how you value certain kinds of things. And so
mhm,
that if you have a way of converting from one to another, and this is the whole question of fungibility among different groups. And this has been a big problem in currencies. If you look at currencies were fine. You didn't even need currencies if you had sort of notion of a gift exchange system and reciprocity mutual aid. But once you start going out groups and working with different kind of groups, then you needed something that had backing. This is where the whole concept of a SAID coin or something like that came into being.
yeah, reserve
And
currency.
that created a conflict with something to create liquidity within a local currency. And so
Hmm.
but now, so how do you resolve that contradiction and how do you pull them together? I think it's because the model of physics that we've used for currencies can be replaced by something that's based on biology and agency,
Hmm.
and it learns.
Hmm.
Markets do not learn; they don't learn. Anyway, so that's my take on that. Okay, well, we have to say
Appreciate it, John.
Yeah. Will, do you want to chime in on this?
Sure, I'll jump in for a quick minute before Randall there. The basic beginning of what we do work a lot with, like Red Cross and different groups, is you start with some endowment of something valuable. So you have a pool, you have a common pool resource, and then you're giving reciprocal drawing rights to that common pool. So what you do is you say, okay, let's say there's $10,000 in that pool, or $10,000 worth of X, or however you want to define it. And you say, okay, Bob, who offers X, Y, and Z services, he's going to be able to pull out $500 of that, but he has to put in his commitments for his services, right? So he gets prepaid for his jobs. Someone else can put in $500 worth of apples and so on. You can eventually they're eating through that endowment. And it creates this space now where they can now start doing cross exchange with each other. And so we've seen that happen over and over. And you start with an endowment, you enable people to have reciprocal access to that endowment, and then they can start having credit in and out with each other. They've already been prepaid. It works really well across the whole Islamic finance world. Red Cross, all the bioregional work we do, you start with some form of endowment, right? You build the pool. What we did was we took a lot of the work of Bancor and we said, what actually are the underlying protocols without having to use algorithmic blockchain bonding curves, right? How do we actually look at what indigenous societies were doing in terms of pooling? They start with a common asset in that pool. They enable reciprocal drawing rights and they enable exchange across that pool. Then you have an overlapping pool over here and over here and over here, and then you have routing through those pools. Okay. That's I think what both Scott and John are talking about somehow. It works really quite well. And now really just the question is which technologies, which interfaces are you going to use? We've built very simple ones on little feature phones, so you don't even need internet for it in Kenya. You have mamas who have never even don't even know how to read, are numeracy enough to be able to express their value and trade it across entire networks in Kenya. 60,000 businesses. We had $3 million of trade last year. In these networks, it's huge, and that's starting to grow all over the world. If you look at the map on our website, we've got hundreds of groups all over different countries in the world now. So it's like whether I don't care if you use our technology or not at all, but if you can latch on to maybe four functions, you have curation of what's valuable to you, you have valuation in that network, right? What's valuable relative to each other, curation, valuation, then you have limitation, what's the max limits on those things that can be in the pool. So you create balance that way. And then you have your how do you do exchange? Those four things within a governance framework, and that can be individual group. There's many, many ways to govern those types of networks. Can be quite beautiful. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Will. I want to take a pause here, noting that we have about 7 minutes left and we have a couple hands up. And what I want to do is kind of do my normal closing and share out the links that I like to share and offer the invitations. And then for anyone who wants to stay, you're welcome to stay and keep chatting. We'll see what Randall's question is, and if we have time, Iris's as well. No expectations, John, Scott, or Will to stay after the hour, but just want to give a clean break for folks to turn off if they need to hop. So let me just do my spiel here. If you look in the chat, I just put 4 links. One is to join the community of practice on Hilo, where we will be posting this recording. And there's been so many amazing links also shared in the chat. And so we'll be harvesting all of that and making sure that those links are shared with the recording. The next link there in that chat is the next field building call, where we're going to have 2 really inspiring organizations working in the Argentinian Andes on forest conservation and regeneration and kind of local regenerative economy building, talk about their work and how they're financing that. And then those last 2 links, if you want to add us to your Google Calendar, you can do that. And there's also an invitation. If you think your organization might be fit to share about your work on one of these calls, especially if you're working in a place-based way, doing bioregional organizing, we'd love to hear from you and feature you on an upcoming call. So thank you very much, Samantha. Is there anything you want to chime in with before we
Yeah,
get
I got a
closer
couple
to?
things. Just first, gratitude for our 3 incredible speakers today and their amazing work, all the wisdom that they've shared. Also, the engagement from participants today. Love seeing just the fire and excitement around this, and definitely feels like a topic we're probably going to come back to before too long because there are so many rich, big questions here that we're holding. And a request to, yes, apply to present in our field building calls, which are about, kind of place-based work. And we're mostly having bioregional organizing teams present in those field building calls. But also, if you have requests for topics that you would like to see us cover in BioFi deep dives in 2025, we're working on planning out Q1, what topics we're going to cover in those deep dives. If you have particular speakers you would like for us to have on, send those suggestions to hello@biofi.earth or to Tyler or I on Hilo or via email. But we're really looking forward to kind of deepening in some of these questions in 2025 and starting to apply some of these approaches and tools in the bioregions that we're working with and to report back on how that's going and challenges that we're experiencing. So lots of exciting things to come in the new year. And thanks to everyone for joining today.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. And yeah, I don't know where Rendell went. Will, John, and Scott, thank you so much. No pressure to stay after these 3 minutes, but just for those who are curious and loving this topic, I didn't want to prematurely close it. So Iris, I see you have a question. Oh, there you are, Randall. We'll go to Iris.
Randall's still here. Randall's still
Oh,
here.
yeah, thank you. I mean, I just want to say, I mean, the more I was thinking about my contribution was more rhetorical, really, and I just want to give the space to Iris, maybe. I see if I jump after, maybe. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Randall. Great to see you in this space again. Always nice to be with so many people that I've actually already spoken to over the last years, and then new people here in this community of BioFi. Super, super grateful and very, very happy that I'm finally in a room with John Klippinger and Will Ruddick, who I've been following for the last years since I started this work that I'm doing here in the Oost Peninsula. Some of you might know my colleague, Tricia Stapleton. She's kind of like my co-spirador. And we set up a community currency in with Los Higuerones. And the thing is, Will, I have a particular question for you around this technology, because I've been looking into your SEP. I think it's the SEPA technology, where people don't necessarily need to have like a whole digital skill set in order to use it, and which is something that is super present for us at this moment in time. And at the same time, we're just struggling here as well. And it's maybe also a question to the whole community of BioFi. It's just like, if we're a grassroots initiative, and yes, there is just a lot of moving parts, and at the same time it's like, okay, how do we get the funds in order to, like, pay for a technology like will, to be able to implement that in a region where we're actually among 2.5% of the earth's biodiversity, and a culture that still knows how to live in a harmonious way with this amount of life around, like, so yeah, that's basically my question of like, yeah, is there, what are kind of like the tips, maybe tips and tricks, or like the ways that we can implement a technology like this in a region that is still, yes, that's just one of the climax ecosystems in the world, basically. And then also working with those who are not technologically skilled, and maybe allowing them to, like, take the fruits of the technology without necessarily needing to be completely onboarded in the whole back end system of what's there. So yeah, I'm just sitting with that question. I've been actually sitting with that question for the last 2 years. So I'd love to have some input there, from Will or John or whoever feels called to share.
I can jump in first. The USSD stuff that we run, it's like a short code menu. So you dial like *384 *96. You've got to have a server running. That server's going to connect you to whatever like MTN, Airtel, telecom that you have there. There's a company called Africa's Talking that's starting to work in South America as well, a few other places around the world. But basically, you need to run a server that's going to connect you to the local phone lines so that people, even if they don't have internet, they can dial these little short codes and get there. And I'll stick my email in there and I'll tell you how to get that set up. But you're talking, once everything's set up, which should only take maybe a week or so, you're talking maybe $150 a month in server fees just to run that yourself. Um, and then alternatively, we have like little paper things you can print, and it has like a QR code, and those things could hold um, claims or commitments on there. We use the term voucher a lot. They can also hold all different kinds of stuff on them. So you can have like a wallet that's a little QR code that people use, but it still needs somebody as an intermediary with like a smartphone, right? Unless they're just going to hand those to each other. And then you're kind of getting into printing costs, and that's been a big problem. But then ultimately, a lot of the really successful communities we see don't use any technology at all, right? They are literally just keeping a record, with witnesses. It can be written down on ledgers of the assets of the communities, the commitments of the community members, and they are having a system to fairly exchange those with each other. It's really simple. There's a whole ton of examples of this from Bernard Leotar in Japan, and many, many different types of systems where people don't need the tech at all. And actually, if you can find the indigenous terminology for those systems, like South America has terms like minga, like there's a whole bunch of beautiful terms for those practices. And actually, it gives me chills every time I hear one of those words because it's like a spell being cast. And quite often there's songs and dances associated with those things. So it's really cool. So the more you can tap into that, the better. And then think of the technology and all this kind of stuff as just saying, well, how do we accelerate or formalize or connect those traditions together in a positive way? And maybe the technology drops back out of it again. Maybe who knows, what happens in the future. But yeah, over.
My concern is that that when you have indigenous populations and they actually are presented for, how do they protect themselves from the external economy? And then how do you, because that is to me one of the huge challenges, because you can look at all these pristine resources and then that's going to be valued as a palm plantation, that's going to be valued as a mining opportunity, and so you have this huge disparity of capital and power coming in, and that is going to subsume it. Even if it worked beautifully at the local level, you have to deal with that global interface. And so at some point, my view is that you're going to have to be able to counter that extractive global impact upon these economies. You can't escape it. And and therefore they have to have the means to create their own income and maintain that in opposition to the extractive interests around them. And we can have wonderful pieces and people can do beautiful things, and they've done it for thousands of years. But this is an extractive monster that's out there, and it has to be countered. And it has to be countered at scale. And I do think you need to have sophisticated technologies to do that because it's a global problem.
Hell yeah, John. You said it. I guess the other thing that I would just invite you, Iris, I mean, certainly you've talked with Carla, right? Also down there in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
You literally have one of the best community currency people and technologists like right up the road. So for local platform level solutions, please see Carla.
Yeah.
Randall, I think we'll go to you as the last question and then bring this to a close. I see your hand, Kevin, and just acknowledging, I think we already heard from you today, and I actually have to hop. So I'll need to wrap this here. But we'll hear from Randall and then
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I hope I can make it. Yeah, it was so much, really that went around, and and yeah, the question from Iris is also, alive in me, and I relate. Of course, we are actually very close by, and I'm like witnessing like this diversity of opportunities with these technologies, social tech, all mixed in. And what I see, and it's alive in me, is how the it's more complex always, is like the social, right? How the tech, of course we want to get the tech right, and I think we're in the great good path of redoing a lot of the stuff, and following these principles, going to living systems and all of this, and it does makes a lot of sense, this as a solution to something that is like a virus. So creating this different system that just counteracts this extraction. It's kind of like a disease, really, but just a different way for us to see and relate to the resources, to understand how we can nurture the health of the whole in a way that the virus becomes inoffensive. So I see like that path is so good, and then I also see the challenges of how we get people to relate to this, and the challenges locally, and the difference in places, as maybe some other places may have like a social weaving that could be stronger, and that really helps a lot. And that's, I believe, the a lot of the challenge to get the social weaving, and the narrative around the tools, and the places. I don't know, it feels like we need this because people really want to be saved from this extractive system, and they don't know what to do about it. They just feel the pressure all the time, every day, of these extractive systems that are just very on top of the people. And the relating of the people here, in the rural places, how they can relate to technology when we make it so complicated, and even so the indigenous. So I really, the system can work for this, for being able, go just on paper, or an agreement that in some way it can work with all of that. I find it really necessary. And I find it difficult, also sometimes frustrating, when it seems that different projects are just trying to do like the same thing, right? And feels like the efforts get diluted, and we just need to get like maybe something at the base that is very reliable, and that serves different fractals of the system that can act in different way. And I think I see that in the scalability of what John is talking about, how to get the tech right. And because I see like so many nuances from projects that make it so difficult, like one chooses to use a different algorithm for something, the other wants to choose a different blockchain
Yeah.
infrastructure, and then it makes it complicated to know where to go to find this. So yeah, just sharing really, uh, what's left on me with it from the conversation.
Thanks, Randall.
Always
Okay.
good seeing you, Randall. I will just share that, last year I spent some time down in Costa Rica in the Diamante Valley with Randall and crew, and I have a great deal of admiration for the work that they're doing. Danny Bell and others have been demonstrating some really amazing leadership and reweaving, right, the communities that are down there. You've got a big expat community, and making sure that we're there in service to the local populations, not at the expense of. It's just such a critical core value, and it's just a delight seeing some of that in action. So keep up the great work, done.
Unless there's anything from you, John and Will, you'd like to check out with, I'll bring us to a close and send us on our way.
This is great. This is a great conversation. I appreciate being a part of it. And I think, I mean, and there are a lot of very complex issues that are hard to get across, but I appreciate there's multiple points of view and the level of commitment that people have. So thank you for including me.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Will. Looking forward to continuing the conversation on Hilo and in future calls and conferences and gatherings. I know Darren is on the call. He's organizing a BioFi summit in Seattle in the spring. So hopefully some in-person time for all of us in the near future. Thank you, Tyler, for co-hosting with me, and we will see all of you soon.
Just one thing I wanted to add before we go,
Yeah.
Samantha, was this. I left home about, I don't know, 20 hours ago with 30 of my neighbors coming over to help fix the road from some water damage by our place. And it's part of this rotational system, doesn't need any technology, and it's just so powerful. We build one house almost every week with mud and stick. We do syntropic agroforestry. It's hugely powerful. And just, I love that I'm talking to a group of people that are identified with land somehow and they can know their neighbors. And if we can just bring that culture back, right? There's an endangered species there of how we actually relate to one another, the real actual fabric of our society and how we love and share. That's possible, and it's within every indigenous community. It's everywhere. If we can bring that little small thing back, it's just so incredibly huge. So I just, in terms of all of this talk around currencies and whatnot, it's just how do we actually care and show love and be reciprocal with one another? And I'm feeling that here we have some of that as a group here today. So I appreciate you guys all. Thank you.
I feel that too, Will. Thank you for closing us with that. And that is the core question is how do we get back to being more caring beings and unlock those flows of care? And Tyler works a lot with a community that is trying to create the maternal gift economy. So maybe we'll do a BioFi deep dive on that in 2025. So more soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.